Hey y'all, welcome to Where is My Hairbrush? I'm Eliza,
And I'm Gabrielle.
and we're here to talk about Veggietales.
That's right.
Today we are talking about episode 5, Dave and the Giant Pickle. This episode was released in 1996 and is 2 acts of the same story like the last episode we discussed, Rack Shack and Benny. This is the first appearance of Larry Boy,
Ba-da-ba-da,
Larry Boy,
ba-da-da-ba-da.
eating green, lean machine, Larry Boy. Oh, Larry! Okay, anyway. So, Gabrielle, did you remember which silly song went with this episode?
Okay, kind of. I a little bit cheated. You can tell me if you think this is cheating. I couldn't remember off the top of my head, so all I did was I pulled up my Spotify playlist of silly songs and I looked at them and I said, I think it's I Love My Lips. But I had to look at a list to get there.
Not cheating.
Great, then I didn't cheat.
Well done.
Thank you.
I guessed incorrectly, as Gabrielle can tell you. I thought it was Barbara Manatee. 'Twas not Barbara Manatee.
That's
'Twas
okay.
I Love My Lips.
I almost guessed Song of the Cebu, and I would
What
have
a
been
good
wrong.
one.
That's a good
What a good
one.
one.
But
Yeah,
you know how I realized it wasn't that one? I was like, I don't think we've seen enough of Jimmy and Jerry to have that much personality
fair
for
enough.
the silly song, because I feel like that silly song is so much personality for everybody that it was
Mm,
too soon. And I was correct.
well done.
You know whose personality we do have? Larry.
As well as Archibald. I think Archibald's
Yes.
pretty well established.
Yes. Yeah. I didn't really realize how many, he's in like everything.
Yeah, he's just around.
Mm-hmm.
How could he not be?
Been around town. What did you remember about this episode?
Not much. I don't think I'd ever seen this episode.
What?
I know.
Wow.
I feel like it's a pretty core lore one, but
Yeah.
I just somehow I'd never seen it. I thought it was a new one. Like I didn't realize that it was such an old episode. I thought it was one of the ones that had been done like a little
Oh
bit
my.
after the age that it was really appropriate to be watching VeggieTales.
Yes.
Not that there's an appropriate age. We all know that that's a
A
silly episode.
socially accepted age.
Yes, where
We
I
don't
didn't
accept
feel
society standards.
exactly, where I didn't feel lame about watching it, I guess.
Hmm.
Um, but no, it came out early. It's just somehow it slipped through my grasp. That was the tough part about the VHS age is if you didn't physically
Mm-hmm.
have it, you weren't watching it.
It was
So,
like it didn't exist.
hmm
Wow. Okay, so I love this episode. My before we I watched it, my main remembrances were that the sheep fell down, that David brought pizza to his brothers on the battlefield.
Sure.
And then I remembered that he sang a song while wearing King Saul's armor and that he fell over like a tin can.
Mm.
Those are the main things I remembered.
It was like the tipping cattle bit from
Yes, from
Cars.
Cars.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, that's so funny.
super good.
So, okay, Eliza, would you give us the plot
Oh, I would
of
love to give
this
the
episode?
plot. Okay, so it's painting an image in the beginning. You have the sons of Jesse. And it doesn't show you all of them because Jesse
No,
had
there's too
eight
many.
sons total.
Mhm.
But he gives you three, and then he's like, and there, no, not the sheep, but behind the sheep is David. Because funny, it was like, haha,
It's so
David.
small.
Dave is so funny that he can hide behind a sheep or unintentionally, like
Right.
and all of his brothers kind of pick on him because he's the youngest and yada yada. And like, whenever the sheep tip over, they expect Dave to pick up their sheep as well as his own sheep, and they expect him to run errands for them and yada yada yada. He's really, it's the hard knock life for Dave.
Yes.
Um, anyway, so this is all happening, and then the dad comes over, played by Pa Grape himself, who, by the way, if you don't know what Pod Grape looks like off the top of your head, you should directly compare him to the coach of
I have
the
no idea what you're
Kansas.
about to
Yeah,
say.
you should directly compare him to the coach of the Kansas City Chiefs, because they look like they are the one and the same.
Wait, I need to look up what the coach of the Kansas
You
City.
do that, I'll continue with the plot. So
Okay.
Pod Grape hops over drastically, and he's like all in a flurry. He's like, "A battle has begun," or like and the Phil's.
He
Oh, he
does look
says,
just like him.
and now the rest of you can do that too.
He's so round. It's so funny. He looks just like him. I love it.
It's
Okay, sorry.
really good. He's coming over and he says the Philistines are attacking, but he's out of breath, so it's sort of like the Philistines are attacking. And they mishear
Lima
him.
beans are slacking.
Yeah, and then there was another line after that, similar, where you like make up things that are
So funny.
and like unironically, part of my sense of humor as an adult is to pretend that I mishear people and replace the things they say with rhyming
Yes.
stuff, or like to pretend as or like gaslight them into thinking they're saying something different.
Right.
Like they'll be like, "Oh," like if they're like talking about an actor or something, and they're like,
Uh-huh.
I just went and saw a movie with Chris Hemsworth in it this weekend, and I'm like, oh yeah, the guy that plays the love interest in Princess Diaries 2, and they're like, no, I think you're thinking of Chris Pine. I'm thinking, and then I say, no, that's the guy that played the main role in one of the main roles in Parks and Rec, and they're like, no, that's Chris Pratt, and then I just keep leading them on this trail until they eventually feel bullied.
Realize that you actually know things.
It's a subtle trickery to pretend to be stupid.
Mhm, mhm.
Anyway, so they have this moment where they mishear him. All to say the Philistines are attacking King Saul with
Mhm.
like an army. And the boys are like, "Oh, we'll do it." And then the dad looks at Dave and the rest of them, they're laughing and they're like, "Dave, you're too small." And Dave's like, "No, I'm not." And they're like, "But you are." And then he doesn't get to go to war, which, boy problems. What can you do?
Right.
Um so the oldest brothers go, and then there's this war happening like in two very small encampments. And like one of the encampments is all the French peas.
It's so funny. I love that they put captions on the French peas when they talk, even speaking English in a French accent. I thought
Yeah,
that was so funny.
it is really funny. And then the other camp is like everyone who's not the French peas, basically. And it's not crazy. There's like 15 veggies on each side, but on the
Mhm.
French pea sides, it's all French peas, okay? And they're like,
Yep.
ha ha ha, we don't have to worry about you guys. The French peas are making fun of them, and they're just throwing like really lame, bad insults at each other. And eventually the French peas are like, okay, why don't we send a champion and you send a champion, and whoever wins the battle then can have the other as slaves. And they're like, great deal, let's
That
send
sounds
one.
fair because they're looking at all these little French peas.
Yeah, they're like, you guys are so small, that'll be like, taking candy from a baby. And then out comes Goliath, and Goliath is one big pickle. He's
A,
like,
a giant pickle, if you will.
he literally is like the size of a Veggietales building. He's huge. And he hops out, and his hop speed is so slow because he's so big. And he's like, who will fight me? And then everyone's like, not me.
Bye.
And so they disperse on the Israelite side. They're like, we can't fight that guy. He's too big, too scary. Um,
And this goes on for 40 days.
40 days, the big pickle comes out. He's like, anybody want to fight? Then there's just crickets. Like nobody's responding to this guy. Nobody wants to fight Goliath. And then Dave comes along on his little, very slow moving sheep into the camp, and he's bringing food for his bros. And he's like, why is everybody hiding? And they're like, shh, you'll draw attention to yourself. And he's like, what do you mean I'm gonna draw attention to myself? And they're like, oh, Goliath's gonna see you and then you'll have to fight him. And he's like, okay. And then they explain to him the situation with Goliath, coming out every day and be like, who's gonna fight me? And
Mhm.
they're like, these guys, this is an insult. Like, he's insulted our God, and our God can do big and crazy things. And none of you are willing to trust God enough to fight him? You're crazy. And
And
so
meanwhile,
then
they're all like stuffing their faces with pizza, and they're like, "Yeah, whatever, Dave."
Exactly. And then Dave goes to King Saul and he's like, I'll fight Goliath. And King Saul literally spit takes. He's like drinking his little water out of a martini glass looking thing, and he just spit takes because he's like, this kid is gonna fight the big building sized pickle. Not likely. Anyway, so they have a conversation. Dave sings him a song, of course, you got to.
Mhm.
And then Saul's like, okay, whatever, yeah, go fight this guy. And then Dave goes out and he's like, I'll fight you. And the pickle's like, okay, great. And then he takes off his like, it's like a boxing
Yeah.
robe.
That's so funny.
And he's got like boxing gloves and boxing shorts underneath, and he comes over and like the CGI for these things is so clunky, and they're just
Like,
awkwardly moving around in random
and
ways
they're just like
around his.
wiggling because they're it's just like so and there's like the bell that starts off the boxing match appears
Hmm.
out of nowhere.
Yes. Yeah, it's classic. And then Dave, he hops over and then he takes it off his like headdress thing. And he starts to whip his head in a circle, and you realize that has he has a slingshot attached to his head atop his asparagus head. And he's just like whipping that thing around and then yeets it at
And
Goliath.
my
And
favorite part of the fact that it's on his head is that like in that same moment they're pretending that the pickle has boxing gloves on his fake hands.
mm-hmm,
But they did
mm-hmm.
not give Junior invisible hands to sling the slingshot. No.
They
He had to do
absolutely
that
did
with his head.
not. It was buried in his asparagus head. Um, and so he eats the rock, knocks over the pickle, wins the battle, and everyone celebrates. They're like, "Whoa, Dave, you're crazy! How'd you do that?" It's very much like that
Like an underdog
epic
moment.
rap battle
Oh,
video from YouTube where they're like, "Super hot fire, I spit that," and then everyone goes, "What?" That's sort of the energy around Dave after eating the rock with his slingshot head.
oh my.
Um, and it's a celebration until the end. In the middle, there was "I Love My Lips," which we'll get
That
to.
is
It gets
so
its own little
funny.
slot, but that's the basic
Yeah.
plot. Anything you want to
I-
add, Gabrielle?
Um, just I guess so the counter scenes for this one. Larry is basically this all starts because he's sad that he's boring. Poor
Mm,
Larry. And so he dresses up as Larry Boy, a superhero.
mm,
And Bob asks why he's dressing up, and Larry's like, well, I'm just tired of being boring old Larry. And so then the story is how like David was a little guy, but he did big things. And so then at the end, Larry is empowered by the story because he realizes he doesn't have to be a superhero to be cool and be special.
big true. I think that's super relatable. As a kid, I would like uh, almost compulsively overextend truths in order to make my stories more interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Like adding little like
Embellishment.
if the fish was this big, really the fish was this big. You can't see my hands. And if the fish was the size of like a shoe, then it was really the size of like two shoes. Like these
Right.
kinds of things, just constantly
Exaggerating.
over exaggerating
Mm-hmm.
for the sake of wanting to be interesting enough for people to
Mm-hmm.
listen.
Mm-hmm.
Which is not that's not good. Like kids'
Yeah.
stories are worth listening to even though they are mundane. Like their stories are big to them, so
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but what you
I
gonna
just
do
watched a Twilight Zone episode about that.
about not being boring?
No, about, well, like, yeah, about exaggerating. Like, this guy, every single thing he said was basically a lie. And then these aliens come down and they kidnap him because they think he's the most amazing person that is on Earth because they don't have a concept of lying.
Mm,
And then they kidnap him and then he is sad.
mm. That's kind of what feels like out in like office style jobs. You're constantly trying to elevate the work that you're doing to seem
Mm,
more important than it is to get recognized so that you can like climb that ladder.
hmm.
Um, so it's a little gross, but it's
Yeah.
It's kind of how our world works.
Hmm. Yeah, like everything has to stand out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, did you have a favorite quote from the episode?
Oh, I did. Whenever Dave goes into King Saul's tent to tell him that he will fight Goliath and the spit take happens,
Mhm.
before Dave goes to sing the song, it like the mood is starting to shift and like they're starting to get a spotlight together and King Saul says, "Oh, don't tell me you're gonna sing," and then he sings.
And then Junior just like kind of smirks. There's no response. It's so funny. So
Yeah,
cute.
it's very. Mm, my life had a lot of singing in it growing up, with my mom being a middle school chorus teacher, and then uh, me and all of my sisters are quite loud. And there would reach a point where you'd be like, okay, that is quite enough singing for me today.
Yep. Yeah.
Did you have a favorite quote, Gabrielle?
Yeah, well, I had two. Um, I was the one I wrote down first in the story. Bob like introduces the Philistines, and then it cuts to Larry listening to the story. And he's like, "What are the Philippines?" Bob's like, "They're a chain of islands in Southeast Asia, but that's not relevant right now."
Yeah, that was classic.
And
So
I love
good.
that because that's so me. Like when I teach, if somebody asks a completely unrelated question, I will answer it, but it'd be like, that's not what we're talking about. But then
And
when we
back
got
to
to
the
the
lesson.
end, I realized what my actual favorite quote was
What is it?
because we get to the very end and Bob asks Larry how he liked it. And he said, I laughed, I cried, it moved me, Bob. And that's just one of my all-time favorite quotes. I say it all the time.
That's
So
really
I was
good.
excited. I didn't remember it came from this episode.
That's really good. Um, I think that as well as like all the just dry humor throughout and all of Junior's little smirks that are not really aligning with the
Mhm.
4-year-old kid's ability to sense a room, like
Right.
all of that kind of stuff was kind of directed at the adults sitting there watching with the kids. Um,
Absolutely.
and there's tons of smirks in this one. Like Junior is so sick and tired of being at the bottom of the food chain. Every time like his life situation is brought up, he just deadpan looks at the camera and he's
Uh-huh.
like, "You
Uh-huh.
guys know why this sucks."
There's also a moment where Jimmy and Jerry are talking about how hungry they are, and they pretty
Oh.
much directly quote the episode where they're on the spaceship and they talk about how hungry they are. And I think one of them says, I'm so hungry I could eat a spaceship. And the other one's like,
Hmm.
what's a spaceship? And
I
it's
don't
like,
know.
yeah, it's just like it doesn't make any sense in context. Um, but you
Yeah,
get it if you've watched the other one.
a little backwards quote.
Mm-hmm.
I
Throwback, callback. That's what they call that.
I know what Junior reminded me of. It came to me as you were speaking. Have
What?
you ever watched Saved by the Bell?
No,
Really?
really.
It was just me.
No, I'm sure there's other people.
All right. Well, it's Saved. That's so dumb. It's Saved by the Bell. One of the main characters, actually the main character. Like, there's a set of main characters, but there's one that's like the super main character.
Uh-huh.
Is Zachary Morris. Um, and he's known for breaking the fourth wall and
Mm,
staring at the camera whenever things
mm.
happen that he wants. And like sometimes he'll address the audience as well. Like time pauses around him, and he looks over. He's like, "You guys know what I'm talking about."
Oh, that's
Um,
so funny.
and Junior was very Zachary Morris this episode, which was good for the time period. That was about the heyday of Saved by the Bell,
I
so.
love it. I love it. That's awesome. I want to move to the Bible passage because I had a lot of interesting revelations whilst reading this.
Mhm.
Do you think, Eliza, you've ever actually read this chapter of First Samuel before?
Yes.
I definitely haven't because there were several things that I was like, oh, I didn't know that. And there were things that I did know, but I don't think I've read it as an adult, like at least not in my
I,
working
s-
memory, I
I said that
suppose.
kind of in a jerk way.
No,
The reason I can
it's okay. I deserve it for my Saved by the Bell comment.
The reason that I can firmly attest that I have read 1 Samuel 17 as an adult,
Uh-huh.
or I read it as an adult too, but I read it the first time, I think, in middle school.
Hmm.
We were told to write a biography of someone,
Hmm.
and growing up in the South, you could easily choose Bible characters, and nobody
Sure.
batted an eye. So I chose David because
Oh.
I liked him a lot based on the David and Goliath story. Um, I did not know about most of the other. I mean, I knew about the rubber ducky version of the story with Bathsheba, but I didn't know about like the other stuff that would come down the pipeline.
Yes.
So I read both First and Second Samuel to really learn about David.
That's so
Um,
cool.
yeah, and then when I when I was in college, I taught Sunday school, and I would have a list of fun facts from every story that we talked about. Because like for the story
Mhm.
time, it would like glance over most of the details, and I'd be like, okay, guys, now here are 3 fun facts that you might not have known. And like
Mhm.
for this one, it was like, this guy was 9 feet tall, over 9 feet tall,
Mhm.
And then like another one might have been that if the Israelites lost, they were going to be slaves, and
Mhm.
that was going to be really bad. And then a third thing might have been like how much all of his armor together, Goliath's armor together
Wade.
weighed. Yeah,
Yeah, that was a cool fact I did not know.
yeah. And then
Yeah.
like the little boys in the room are like, "No way!"
Yeah.
Um, it's crazy.
No, it's really cool. I really okay, this is very silly. But the main reason why I was like, I don't think I've ever read this before is because, like I said at the beginning, the fact that Dave brought pizza to his brothers in the middle of the desert, like, always killed me. I thought that was hysterical. But in the passage, it's First Samuel 17. I can't remember if we said that. It says that Dave brought them basically bread and cheese,
Which is pizza without
which is
sauce.
basically pizza. And I was like, nah. They really for real pulled that from something. It wasn't just veggie nonsense. It was kind of factual. So I love that. That he took, I think, does it say like 10 pounds of cheese? It was a lot of
It
cheese.
was an absurd amount. Take this basket of roasted grain and these 10 loaves of bread and carry them quickly to your brothers and give these 10 cuts of cheese to their captain.
Okay, so I don't know what that means, but it seems like a lot of cheese
Probably the idea was enough cheese either
for
to
everybody.
woo someone or enough cheese for everyone that was there, which would be a lot of cheese.
Yeah. In the veggie episode in Dave and the Giant Pickle, you talked about how his brothers really bully him and mess with him and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And that just is not what's happening in the Bible. It doesn't really talk about David interacting with his brothers at all. It just
Mm-hmm.
says that the 3 oldest went and David stayed behind and watched the sheep. Like, there's no interaction there, which I thought was kind of, well, it made me feel better about his family life.
Until he shows
um,
up to the camp, though.
what?
Until he shows up to the camp, though, because when he gets to the camp to deliver the
Yes.
food and stuff,
Yes.
his brothers are like, David, you're always trying to get the attention and like you're always trying to get the glory. Just leave it, Because
Right.
David's like trying to figure
Right.
out why nobody has gone to battle Goliath yet.
Right. Well, and this is actually right after that was my favorite quote from the passage. I almost picked this as my favorite quote from everything because I thought it was like very sibling. So his older brother says some mean things to him, and then David says to him, "Now what have I done? Can't I even speak?" I mean, that's just like exactly what my conversations with my sister were most of my growing up. So
Yeah.
I thought I was like, well, I guess nothing's changed in the last several thousand years between siblings.
Mm.
Um,
There's
but then
so
a big thing was two big things. In the veggie episode, they don't talk about like the reward for killing Goliath because in the Bible they're like, yeah, you'll get all this stuff. You won't have to pay taxes anymore. Your
hmm
family will be rewarded. Like there'll be all these good things if somebody volunteers, like some incentives, but it doesn't help.
yeah.
And then when David goes to Saul, instead of singing him a song in the Bible, which would be on brand for David,
Mm-hmm.
but he doesn't in this moment sing a song for Saul. He tells Saul about how he has killed both a bear and a lion, right?
Mm-hmm. In
To
protection
protect
of
his
the
flock of
sheep.
sheep. And so he's like, I actually am qualified. Like I did these things and because God gave me the power to do that. And he will also protect me and let me kill Goliath. So he actually makes like a really compelling point for why he can do it.
Mm-hmm. It's a little bit more um it's a little bit more ground to stand on than Junior Asparagus in the veggie episode where he's kind of just like, well, this guy's offending God, so I better do it.
Right,
And
right.
Saul's like, what are your qualifications? He's like, I believe in God. Those are my
Yes,
qualifications.
yes.
I've been believing in God since 1994. Like that's
He basically has rephrased God is bigger than the boogeyman
yeah,
into a new song. That's
yeah.
basically what the song is still God is bigger than the boogeyman. Um,
Which is
but
all
he changed
true.
some of the words. It is true. It is true. Um, and
And
if that was David's reason, more power to him. But he really did. He was like, yo, I've killed stuff. I can do this.
And there are times when God calls people to do stuff that they're entirely unqualified for. That does happen, but there's
Yes.
also plenty of times, like throughout the Bible, where God calls someone to do something, and you can see how God's been shaping and molding them to be
Mhm.
able to do the thing they've been called to.
Right. Right. He's equipped them for that very moment.
Hmm.
Yeah. The last thing I wanted to say about the passage was, I mean, this one's obvious, but David chops off Goliath's head in the Bible
Hmm.
and then puts it on a stake and takes it back to Jerusalem.
Mm.
And that does not happen
True.
in the veggie episode.
He chops off Goliath's head with Goliath's own sword,
Hmm.
which they had talked about how heavy it was and like how hard it was to wield before,
That's
which
right.
is kind of
Yep.
funny.
Yep.
Um, my favorite quote from the Bible story is when David walks out to face Goliath. All he has is his slingshot, which is
Yeah.
just a wooden, like Y shaped sort of thing with some form of elastic. Or
Mhm.
actually, this was one of the ones where you spun it around and slung it. So
Yep.
it wasn't elastic because this was before the time of plastic, but it was some form of leather, I would assume. Anyway, it just looks like he's carrying a stick, basically.
Yeah.
And Goliath says to him, sneering in contempt, am I a dog? He roared at David, that you come at me with a stick?
Yeah, he says that in the episode too.
No way.
Yeah.
I was
Yeah,
zoning
that's his
out.
first line. He looks at David and he's like, am I a dog that you come at me with sticks in his very low voice? It's pretty epic.
That's so funny.
Yeah. And
It's a
then
great line.
Goliath says something about he will feed David's bones to the birds.
Gross.
Yeah.
All right. What's something that you took away from reading this Bible passage?
Really what you were just talking about, Eliza, about like how God equipped David for this moment
Mm-hmm.
and how he is an unlikely hero in this time in his life. Like he is a shepherd boy,
Mm-hmm.
a little guy. Like he's a boy. He's not very old. I don't think it says how old he is in this story, does it? I don't think so. But he's a kid, just like in the episode, and it doesn't seem like he's prepared, but he really is prepared for this moment. God's prepared his faith for this moment, and he's prepared him physically, and he has experience. And I like how it was rephrased in the episode too. Like he's just a big little guys can do big things too. Like that's what the song says.
Mm-hmm.
And right now, so my husband and I are applying to be missionaries overseas, and we've recently gotten some like specific contact with teams that we're hoping to interview with. And some of the communication we've received from them when I got it and they asked all these questions that we were supposed to answer, and I felt completely like a fish out of water. I was like, what are we doing?
Mm.
I,
Mm-hmm.
are we crazy? Has all of this just been like we are out of our minds and like this is not what we're meant to do because I am not qualified for this. I can't do this.
Mm.
Um, but I think that's me a little bit like feeling like Larry, like feeling like I'm not very special.
Mm.
And I know that it's like a seed of doubt that Satan's planting in my head. Like, oh, see, you can't speak Japanese. You can't do this. You can't do that. Like, why do you think you can do this? But I know that God has equipped me in other ways. Like, I
Mm.
know that I have been equipped for this. I know that I've been called to this because we've been praying about it for, I mean, well over a year. We've been praying about this. And I know that it's not true that I can't do it. But it's hard sometimes when you're faced with big stuff in life. So
Mm.
it really spoke to where I'm at right now in like this specific week, actually.
Mm. It's so tough. It's so tough when you're like in the moment to remember how faithful God is. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's why faith is it's both a gift and something that we practice in order to have. Um, but a large part of doing the things that God has called us to do isn't necessarily being special. It's what
Mm-hmm.
the thing that makes you special is the
That
fact
you're
that you
God's
say
child.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, like the fact that you'll say yes to what he's asking you to do.
Mm-hmm.
And then you might find out how you were equipped in your earlier times in life
Mm-hmm.
as you're doing the thing. You're like, oh, wow, I had these experiences and they definitely prepared me for what I'm seeing right now. Or
Yeah.
it might not, like it might be one of those things where you don't know anything, but you're learning from the people around you and the situations around you, and that's what it
And
is.
maybe you're equipped in the fact that you're a good learner or you
Mm,
like, there's so many different ways that you can be prepared for something other than
mm,
already knowing the thing. Like you don't have to know everything to go say yes to God.
mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. What about you? Is there anything you took away from this passage?
I love this passage. I've
Mm-hmm.
always loved this story. Um, I think as a kid, it spoke to me um, with a bit more strength than it does as an adult. Not saying it doesn't as an adult, but as a kid, I like in my head, David was kind of a kid, and he was like someone that his brothers they're like, oh my gosh, David, the youngest, whatever. Um, and he does this insane thing. He literally goes and challenges a giant because
Mm-hmm.
he feels this in like feeling inside to fight for God's honor, and that he can genuinely do it because God has prepared the way for him. Um, and being a kid, you get told all the time
Mm-hmm.
like you don't
You're
know
not
what you're
big enough.
talking about. You're
Mm-hmm.
not big enough. You're not smart enough. You're not whatever, whatever, whatever. Like one day when you're older, what like every kid's been told at some point.
Right.
Um, who is wanting to try to do something big or bigger than their current age or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
As an adult, sometimes I still run into that stuff. Usually it's the opposite, where like I get asked or told to do something. I'm like, I don't think I'm quite grown up yet enough to do that. Um,
Yeah.
but,
Really, for real. That's so real.
but it's, like now I'm the adult in the room, so I better be, like,
Yeah.
but it's still a huge testament to how God provides for us in situations that are immense or situations that are just flat out scary. Like, can you imagine facing a literal giant?
No.
Like this guy was taller than
With a
anyone.
giant sword? No.
Yeah, like his armor was 135 pounds or something like that. 125 pounds.
He could have just dropped it on me. I'd be dead.
Exactly. It's insane. Like he literally could have just done a belly flop. Oops, dead. Like
Could have tackled him.
that's all he
That would
had
have
to
done
do.
it.
Yeah, pretty crazy. he was huge. And like David was meant to be like a normal guy. He's just a farmer boy, walking around. But he did this thing because God said do it, and he did it, and he was faithful in it, and like received great reward probably within his soul, but also like physically in the realm too, which is crazy. You don't always get rewards for doing what God tells you to do. So
Mm-hmm.
um it just speaks to having faith, and as an adult that it can be easy to rationalize why faith would be stupid.
Yeah, it's like where in the New Testament, Jesus says how he encourages people to have the faith of a child.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and what a great example of that. I don't think I ever made that connection before of David's faith in this story.
It's David throughout scripture is known as a man after God's own heart. And I
Mm-hmm.
think this is where we first see him as that.
Mm-hmm.
Like someone who's willing to have the honor and respect and faith in God to go and
Mm-hmm.
fight for him. Not that God, can't fight his own battles or whatever, but like
Right.
to believe in God enough to fight someone
He's
twice your
pursuing the
size.
same things that God wants to pursue. Like,
Correct.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, really cool. Wow. Um, Thanks for sharing that and for all of those connections. David's just such an awesome character, and there's so many good stories, and I love this story.
Yeah. I really liked this episode. Um, the last thing that we have to discuss in today's episode is the silly song, which is "I Love My Lips." Gabrielle,
Oh my goodness.
how do you feel about "I Love My Lips"?
Love it. I love my lips. It's like when you say I love Lucy, I love Lucy.
Hmm.
Um, I love this song. I'm pretty sure I can sing every single word. I have spent too much of my life learning that middle part. That's a rap
Just
for lack of a better word.
it's just a rant. It's literally
It's
a rant.
it's just like, yeah, he goes off. It's so funny. I love this song.
It's
It's a bop.
so silly. Like it's quite literally one of the silliest silly songs of all time.
Yeah. Yeah. The part at the end where Larry just starts like, oh my gosh, help, words, scatting. I have a music degree. The part at the end where Larry starts scatting, just
Oh
random nonsense.
yeah.
I was like, so good. So excellent. And the fact that it's so silly, and then you have Archibald sitting there, and he's like, what is happening?
He's taking it so seriously. He's scribbling furiously onto
Yeah.
his little script pad,
And
and
and at the end when he's like, "Oh, look at the time." So
Usta.
good. I only knew like one word in Polish, and now I know two because Oscar taught me the word for lip. Usta.
Okay, so lips, gate, usta,
Yep. Oh
which is
my goodness.
so relatable. I've always talked fast, and as a kid, I think I talked faster than I do now because
Oh my
it took
goodness.
me. I might have been in my like early adulthood before I realized I was talking too fast for people to understand me sometimes.
Mm,
Um, Especially like older people, because the older you get, sort of like the
yeah.
slower your ears can process
Hmm.
things into words. And so I had to get told in my last job I would speak a lot in front of a large group of people, the congregation, and I got told many times, if you would just slow down a little bit, that would be great. And so learning to talk slower but still get that same excited emphasis across has
Yes.
been a bit of a learning curve. And I think as a kid, I was really, really bad about it. Like I'd get going a million miles a minute and then so you forget to breathe, and all of a sudden you're like,
Yep.
like, it's very
Yep.
relatable. Um, with Larry trying to spit out his lip stories as fast as his lips will possibly go.
Oh my
It's pretty funny.
goodness. And see, I feel like on the other end, whenever a student will tell me a story and it's like so rambly and so long, and then they get to the end and the point was not at all connected to the rest of all the words they just said, you're like, okay, so what am I writing down?
Usta. Well, Gabrielle, do you have any final thoughts? Any
I'm
closing?
still shooketh that you've never seen this episode before.
Still shooketh.
Yep.
Well, I mean, what can you do? Um, I probably
Not,
had like 30 VHS tapes dedicated to
yeah.
VeggieTales at the house, and this
Yeah,
was
that's a
just not one of
lot.
them. It just wasn't one, you know?
Yeah.
What you gonna
Yeah.
do?
Um, I love that you watched it for the first time and that we're discussing this like fresh,
Mm,
really fresh. I think that's
mm-hmm.
awesome. So
Yeah,
funny.
I really enjoyed it. It was,
It's a
I
good
mean,
one.
it's a VeggieTales episode. It's hilarious.
Right.
It's punchy and witty in all the right ways without
Yes.
being rude.
Yes.
Um, it makes pop culture references without making them too in depth or without doing the ones that are like super cringy.
Yeah.
It's great. Got the
It's so
point across.
yep.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for podcasting with me today. This was so fun.
Wow, thank you for podcasting with me. And thank
Anytime.
you to our audience, to everyone out there listening. Thank you for joining us today. If you'd like to contact us at where's my hairbrush podcast at gmail.com, please do. We'll do our best to answer any questions, thoughts, concerns.
And we'd love to hear your memories of this episode or your thoughts on this Bible passage.
Yes, even if they are ramblings, we'll do our best to give it the best I love my lips impression that we can, and include lots of wit and fun along the way. Now, until next time, remember,
God made you special.
and He loves you very much. Bye!
Bye.